He was a bright young mind and the valedictorian of his elite private school in Baltimore. Then he was off to an Ivy League college. But now he's a 26-year-old man accused of plotting and carrying out the cold-blooded murder of a health insurance company CEO on the sidewalks of New York. Joining me now to talk about this still unfolding story is Jarrett Stepman. Jarrett is a Daily Signal columnist and the author of the book, The War on History. Jarrett, obviously these are only charges so far, but from what police and prosecutors are telling us, including the discovery of a manifesto, which unlike some other shootings, they're reading and telling us about, right, Jarrett? But it sounds like all the motives and all the plot are laid out there. What is your big takeaway from what we know so far about Luigi Mangione and what this can tell us, again, as long as everything we're hearing from the police and prosecutors is true?
Yeah, I think that what this tells us, and I actually think that the bigger story is not just this one individual who's decided to kill a healthcare executive, is this sort of response from the online left to this incident, where there are many who are outright cheering. I think for an individual to take matters into his own hands and conduct an assassination, it makes me very much worried that we're heading into a period of increased left-wing violence, attempts to assassinate figures, especially as the left loses a lot of power in America, that this becomes a tactic. I mean, we already saw this with 2 assassination attempts on the now president-elect Donald Trump. Is this going to become a more common factor? Are we going to see more individuals like this college graduate? This is not just a poor oppressed man. This is a person who actually is sort of from the elite, simply taking matters into his own hands and trying to and actually killing somebody. And I think that that is something that's actually being celebrated by many segments of the online left. You could even say maybe almost the mainstream left. And I find that to be the most disturbing aspect of this entire thing.
You know, Jarrett, we're not courtroom strategists, not here on this program, and we don't do that for a living.
Playboy of all outlets at the time.
You hit something really important, that if I were one of the prosecutors in this case, if it, unless this guy pleads out and there is no trial, but there is a trial, we know exactly what the defense is going to try to do to influence the jury. They're going to try to say, hey, don't we all hate these health insurance companies? Don't they all deny us coverage? And they're going to hope to try to get his charges severely reduced, significantly reduced, based on that sympathy factor. But if I'm a prosecutor, I'm going to pinpoint a couple of things, leading with, hey, you really care about people who aren't getting coverage, or it's too expensive, or they've been denied a surgery or something else like that? The murder of a healthcare CEO will do absolutely nothing to achieve that. And meanwhile, if you look at the defendant over there, Luigi Mangione, this is someone who has an engineering degree, who finished a BA and a master's in engineering from the University of Pennsylvania in 4 years, who has had a lot of AI training and jobs. He could have created an app that increases healthcare access. He could have done a bunch of things technologically, telehealth, for example. He could have done all those things to actually reduce the cost and increase access. Instead, he shot a guy on the streets of New York. I think that needs to be the message, so that we're not being tone deaf to the hatred and the problems of the health insurance industry, which, by the way, makes no business sense in my mind. All it is an intentional middleman. But that is going to be, Jared, they're going to try to use that to get this guy a very weak or sympathetic sentence, right?
Oh, they're going to make him into a sympathetic character, no question. I wouldn't even imagine that they won't have big profiles of him in a lot of left-wing publications. I think that they're going to try to glorify this man as a kind of, the kind of jokerification of society. And I think that that's what's, again, it's so disturbing. I do think the idea that you're going to change the healthcare industry by shooting a few executives is frankly ridiculous. There used to be a time where the left would say that they want positive change to bring better healthcare to America through policy. Now they just want to target people that they don't like. I don't think that's going to work. I think that there's going to be a huge response to this. I think it does show that the direction that the left is now taking, especially post 2024 election, where a lot, especially the online left, is going to go after this.
Okay, Jared, now that case is just starting, but we did get, I think, a great result in New York yesterday with the complete acquittal of Daniel Penny. Of course, it's not over. Many people are now calling for an investigation into the Manhattan DA's office. I call for it too. And even the judge for letting this case go forward in the first place. Now, what's your top priority, if it were up to you, to how to respond to this case right now?
Well, I mean, if I was the powers that be in New York City, clamping down on, frankly, the urban chaos. I mean, the Jordan Neelys of the world, he wasn't the only one. There are a lot of others in New York City and a lot of other American cities. I think that this case, I think that Democrats wanted this to be a George Floyd 2.0. The fact is this case, I think, actually highlighted for many Americans that despite the fact that Democrats are the party of big government, they're not so interested in governing. In fact, they're willing to let individuals like Neely be out on the streets, a man who should have never been there, a drug addict, a schizophrenic, a man who destroyed himself in many ways, but was certainly a public danger. And put Penny in a situation where he had to act. And I think many Americans actually very much sympathize with that. And I think that's why you saw a distinct political shift in this last election. Clamping down on this urban chaos, I think, needs to be a priority. It's something that affects all Americans. It's not just in New York City. It's in many cities across this country. And I think that a lot of Americans, especially if you go into a subway or you go into any of these public spaces, now you're more likely to be afraid. That has to stop. I mean, that's what needs to be a priority. It's very clear that Democrats and a lot of these prosecutors who are on the left don't care to clamp down on that. They're willing to let this just go. I don't think the American people are into that. I think that needs to change very quickly, and certainly to get in control in places like New York City, which has become more dangerous in the last few years, no question.
Jarrett, let's move overseas now. The Assad regime has crumbled in Syria. Israel has destroyed just about all of the Syrian defense infrastructure, and there's reports this morning that U.S. troops are joining in, going into some buildings where they think there may be chemical weapons, joining with Israeli troops. We'll have to get confirmation on that, but that would be interesting. But so much could still go wrong, since the so-called rebels are led by notorious terrorists. So I'd like to stay out of it as much as possible as it unfolds, but do you think there's a way the U.S. can limit its involvement?
I think we can. I think that's an important take on all this. Of course, these groups that are taking power in Syria, I think we shouldn't have any illusions that these are freedom fighters or these are nice people. I mean, this is basically an offshoot of al-Qaeda. Now, one that's trying to message to the West that, well, they're a moderate version of al-Qaeda. I don't think we should be deluded into thinking that. It is, unfortunately, a situation of chaos and anarchy and a lot of these vacuums, as we see in the past. We saw this with the Arab Spring, where a lot of dictators that get toppled and deposed leads to actually something that's quite a bit worse. And I think that that's what a real fear at this moment, that's what's going to take place in Syria. And so I do hope that the incoming administration now will have a plan for what to do with this, and to especially work with our partners like Israel in the Middle East to ensure that radical Islamic groups like al-Qaeda don't come to power.
Jarrett, now staying on this topic generally, if you recall, Tulsi Gabbard, back when she was in Congress, she took a lot of criticism for visiting Syria as Assad's guest several years ago. Of course, there's a lot of other members of Congress who met with him, including Nancy Pelosi. But how do you see events in Syria playing out? Because Gabbard has, at least in the context of Gabbard's tough confirmation fight, she's trying to become the director of national intelligence. And you can see some of the Democrats are being snarky about that, about what's happened to Bashar Assad, as if it's a bad news for Tulsi. I'm not so sure it's bad news, though. How do you take it?
No, and I think she does bring fresh thinking. She's among that young cohort of those who fought in the global war on terror, but the younger cohort, the people who were actually, in many cases, fighting in that war and saw a lot of the mistakes of the previous generation. I mean, after all, we had, I think, a lot of foreign policy missteps where we actually went intentionally and toppled regimes like in Libya that actually led to greater regional chaos. And I think that Gabbard brings a new kind of thinking, and to a certain extent, I think that they will understand this moment, that it's not just, the Arab Spring was not just bringing freedom and liberty to people, that this is a fraught circumstance that sometimes we need to negotiate with people who aren't so nice in the Middle East. That's just something that's very common. And I think that Gabbard understands this. And I think Trump understands that he needs that kind of fresh thinking in his administration. I think that's very much a good thing. So I think this is actually very much an opportunity for Gabbard to have a lot of influence in a changing time in the Middle East.
Okay, I like your optimism. Now, finally, Jared, I want to ask you about your recent column for the Daily Signal. The headline reads, I love it, "Firing incompetent and woke generals is necessary, not fascism." Well, tell us how you really feel, Jared. But seriously, tell us just how serious the woke virus is in our military, not just in universities and in schools.
Well, it's very much connected to our universities and our schools and corporate America. I mean, the military went down this path just like all the other major institutions in our society. I mean, you had the previous administration that fully embraced this, and you have a lot of people who made their way to the very, very top echelons of the military who brought this ethos into the military that I think has always been noted for being very traditional and conservative. I think that changed in recent years, and I think that there needs to be a desperate reorganization, especially as we are in now very troubled times. I think in part thanks to the previous administration, thanks to the Biden administration. I mean, there's been reorganizations of the military in the past. George C. Marshall did so before World War II. I think, thank goodness that he did so, bringing new thinking into the military. And, issues like DEI or the wokeness that I think very much has been brought into the military hampers our warfighting in the future. It makes the American military weaker, and prioritizing things like the greening of the military or DEI. These are things that make our military less effective in the long run. We have a historic recruiting crisis, among other things. And there needs to be a rethink at the top. And so I think this reorganization of generals, that this commission that Trump has proposed, is very much a good thing. I think this idea that this is just like, oh, this is some kind of red purge is incorrect. This is about getting the military in a better place for the potential conflicts we have in the future. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you knew you didn't have DEI in the military in the old days. So when you saw someone like a Colin Powell reach the heights of the command structure in the U.S. Army, you knew that was because of merit and not because of some kind of affirmative action program or something like that. And we just can't say that anymore. And that to me is an affront to all people, white and black, in this country and everyone in between. Jarrett Stepman, thank you so much for joining us. Now, just ahead, it's time to pay a visit to the man, the myth, the legend, the DC spark plug, David Brody, as we talk about a political move that might be able to seal the new unity in the Republican Party. And it's all about this woman you see right here, Lara Trump. Stay tuned. American Sunrise Early Edition has its final bow in just a few moments.